Welcome everybody to our January 2021 MemLab Network webinar. And I'm really excited to have Emily Vinson with us today from Houston, Texas. She's the audiovisual archivist at the University of Houston Libraries. And I've heard her talk before about her recent deep dive into video and audio transcriptions, but I know I haven't heard all the details or updates. So I'm really excited to have her share all that with you guys today. So Emily, take it away.
I'll never learn. Thanks, Siobhan, for inviting me. I'm excited to be here, and everyone who is able to join, thank you. Or if you're watching this recording in the future, thanks for taking the time to watch it. So, right, as Siobhan said, one second. I'm the AV archivist at the University of Houston, and I'm going to talk today about a little bit about a research project I did into transcription methodology, and then about the sort of realities of it that came to fruition in the sort of realities of the pandemic. So with that, let me share my screen and get going. And if at any point, something looks weird or not right, just give a holler and I'll try to fix whatever's going wrong. So, yeah, with that, let's get. So a little bit of background, like I mentioned, about 2018, in like the end of 2018, I received a small grant from my library. That's like an internal grant for early career librarians, which is a generous way to describe me, but I was early career at my institution, so I still counted. And basically the grant allowed for 3 years, $3,000 per year to support research. And it was a pretty open definition of research. And my interest was in examining the accuracy of various transcription methods. I was very interested in creating better accessibility to our collections, but honestly didn't know where to start. And I had sort of come from this assumption that, I'd heard so much about these like amazing AI solutions. And I just thought, well, that's it, like you'll just throw everything into a computer and it'll come out perfect. And I had been in a meeting and I had said something about this like great new opportunity or technology. And someone else was like, oh no, I think that we should, like, if we were going to do something like that, we should just pay students to do all of it by hand. And I was like, what a wild idea that is. So I thought, well, what a good starting point to use this money to look at different methods. So that's sort of what a bit of the background for this. So I developed a little study, a modest for sure study that looked at 4 basic methods. So using professional transcription services, those online AI-based services that I thought held all the answers, free hacks, things like rerouting your audio back into Google Docs voice services, or at the time YouTube had free captioning. I think that that's maybe either was going to go away, and I'm not sure if that really happened. I know there were like some petitions to try to keep it available, so I'm not sure where that stands. And then also looking at basically untrained study participants. So I work at a university, so I had to do a IRB and recruited from within the library's student and staff, and they were given $50 gift cards in exchange for their time for working on this project. And then I did a variety of types of videos to try to capture the most common problems that someone, or not even problems, most common types of videos someone might find in an archive. Because if you look at the fine print of almost every transcription service or software, it really wants the speech to be clear, no background noise, one speaker, one language. And how often do you really encounter that kind of recording in the wild? at least in my experience, not very often. Like rarely is there one person speaking slowly and clearly for any length of time. So I chose 5 different video samples. They were fairly short to be sort of respectful of the amount of time that our my study participants would have to spend on their project. Since they were only getting a $50 gift card, I didn't want them to spend hours and hours working on the project. So there was a single speaker, clearly scripted speech recording, one with basically B-roll of interview with lots of crosstalk and people speaking off mic, multi-person recordings, bilingual speech. As mentioned, we live in Houston, or I live in Houston, and quite a bit of our recordings are bilingual, Spanish and English. And then recordings with kind of background music and other sort of clutter that can make it hard to distinguish what's happening. And then I developed a sort of shorthand to decide what would count as an error and what couldn't count as an error, just to sort of judge everything on an equal footing. So for example, adding or omitting words was obviously an error, misspellings or typos, misused homonyms that might change the meaning of a sentence, or discrepancies in contractions, which are really common when it's a sort of a untrained participant making their transcription. So a classic is there versus they are. People tend to correct to what they're more used to. So that happened a lot. And then I did not count as errors like not using disfluencies. So you've probably heard me say who knows how many times in this talk so far. So if someone didn't write every down, I didn't count that as an error because it doesn't really fundamentally change the meaning. Alternate spellings, if both were correct, were fine. Incorporating numbers or numerals, I decided that again, like maybe there's preferred standards, but it didn't change the meaning. Punctuation and capitalization errors. And then words that were too close to call. There were several instances where I could listen to the recording 5 times and I also couldn't tell what the correct use was, especially when people are talking over each other. So I didn't count that as errors. Everyone kind of got equal footing. And so basically how it all worked out is for those 5 recordings that were part of the project, I had as clean as possible created transcripts that were the sort of yardstick to measure everything off of, and then graded all of the professional services, AI created transcripts, freely created transcripts, and participant transcripts against those master files, and then counted the number of errors. And then, so on this graph, you can see on the, it is not well labeled, but you can see that on the left-hand side are the number of errors, and on the right-hand side is the cost. So basically the colored bars show the number of errors per transcript. This is an average over all the transcripts. And on the red bar shows you how much the transcript cost. So you can see that, like, for example, the professional services in kind of a teal color on the left are highly accurate and also can be quite expensive depending on which service. The AI services tend to be not terribly accurate, but also very, very cheap. And the study participants fell somewhere in between. They really varied in how accurate they were. And then I was able, because I work in Texas and we are at a public institution, I could see what the hourly wage for these participants were. So that's where you get your your price per minute cost for those participants. So that's the background. I had already done this research and I didn't know where to take it and I had no plans for it. But we'll get into where that went in a moment. I just wanted to familiarize you all. I don't want to assume people are familiar with Webvtt format files, but there are 2 kind of main format of files that are used for creating closed captions. One is Webvtt and one is SRT. At the University of Houston, our AV repository is based in Avalon, and that accepts Webvtt files. So that's what we use for our captioning. And just briefly, Webvtt is short for Web Video Text Tracks. It's a W3C standard for displaying time text with HTML5 track element. And the basics of the formatting, it has to have this Webvtt header on the document. It looks kind of like a TXT document, but it has the Webvtt in all caps at the top, and it has a .vtt extension on the file name. And then there at the top, there's sort of the first set of captions. So it's labeled number 1. It has the timestamp in hour, minute, second, millisecond format. And then you can format it however you want. So if you want, we defaulted to all of ours have 96 characters per line, 3 lines per section. So you can see that within, a given section, that's basically how it breaks down. However it looks in this, like the 3-line format is how it will look when it displays on the video screen. So that was just a little primer. But now to get to the project that sort of brought all this home for us. The project really took off in the face of COVID, as probably all of you experienced. There was a real, a quickly changing landscape between, oh, classes are going to be canceled for a week, oh, classes are canceled indefinitely, everything's closed all of a sudden. And there was really, at the University of Houston anyway, it was sort of a slow progression. I was still working until the whole county shut down because the library was still open, but it really varied widely. So student workers had been sent home from work much earlier than like folks who worked in professional positions. So we tried our best to be nimble in the face of all of that. So roughly, this is the timeline of the project. On March 18th, we had a department meeting, and that was 2 days after the departments started to transition to work from home. Every department worked differently, so our department was still, well, partially still on site, and classes had all gone online. And so 2 days after that, on March 18th, we had a department meeting where we were just trying to brainstorm how we could help our students continue to work while they were working remotely. And at that time, I think we were incredibly naive and thought it would be maybe a month or two, or, had no idea. So I sort of, honestly, a little bit offhandedly was like, well, we could work on some transcription because my dream is to have our AV accessible online. And right now there was almost no captioning available. So I kind of threw that out there. And that afternoon, my department head took that to the leadership, and it was approved that day. And so, so that afternoon, I was very lucky to hear from some other folks in the library that were enthusiastic to help manage such a project. So the following day, on March 19th, we had our first meeting to kind of brainstorm. At this point, we really had almost no idea how it would work. So put some thought into it and decided that starting these transcripts from scratch would be really far too cumbersome. So I was able to transition that money that I mentioned from that grant. So I had $3,000 from my year because I hadn't spent any money yet to create some pretty rough transcripts. So that was going to be our base, was to create kind of rough Webvtt already formatted transcripts that were fairly inaccurate. And so we kind of outlined a project plan, and then just had a deluge of managers from across the library volunteering their students to work on the project because they did not have any work that kind of transitioned to online. So within a week, we had 26 students that were going to be working on this project. So on March 26th, we hosted our first Zoom training and set the students off to work. And then in April, after we were confident that some of the students were really excelling in the work, we had a second cohort of students trained to do QC, which was like a little bit more detailed and almost a higher level of expectations for their work. And, so it was a really quick project, basically less than a month from the idea coming into our heads to getting to work. And like I mentioned, I was extremely lucky. The metadata and digitizations unit has a digitization office. And so the other 3 folks that joined me in managing the project are pictured here: Nicholas, Crystal, and Andrew. And without them, I'm not sure that any of this would have been possible. It was like truly a team effort. They already had a lot of systems in place because they worked with like a large number of students, which is not my experience. I've at most managed 1 or 2 students at any given time, and they were used to managing large students in a production environment that was different from what I work in. So that was pivotal in this project's success. And we also maintained, even though we had these 26 students from across the library, we never took over the administrative supervision. So we never took over responsibilities for, okaying timesheets or answering HR questions. We truly only managed the project, which I think was also crucial to the success, because I think if we'd also had to take on the like sort of typical managerial roles of reminding students to clock in or correcting timesheets, I'm not sure we could have hung on for very long. In that sort of brief couple of weeks while we were getting going, we created extensive documentation that we made available to all the students, which if at any point anyone who watches this presentation is interested in seeing our documentation, I'm more than happy to share it. But basically it consisted of a basics of our technical requirements that we expected the students to have on their computers, expectations around how we thought that they could communicate with us and where everything was located that they might need for the project, and then some guidelines for closed captioning, just to make sure that, though of course there would be some variation in the type of transcripts being created, because people are going to always do things a little differently, we wanted them to be as homogeneous as possible. So we tried to kind of set out guidelines for everything you can imagine, from like formatting dates in writing, using abbreviations or acronyms, all that sort of thing. So we tried to take care of a lot of those things. And this is very much a living document that as we got feedback, we tried to correct or address new issues that would come up. Communication was also crucial with such a big team and such a, I would say I had never met any of the students that worked on this project in person. I still haven't met any of them in person. So communication was a big part of it. We used email for our initial contact. Microsoft Teams is the preferred platform for staff at our library. So we used that to talk to the other managers. We used Slack. We had a Slack channel to talk to our student workers. So any questions they had, they could Slack us. Google Drive was for all the files to go in, except for the video files, which were in Dropbox. And then Zoom, of course, for training. So it was, obviously, we were kind of cobbling together all the pieces as best we could. And then as far as workflow tools, Sonix is kind of the cheap, I think it is about $3.75 per hour. So it was a pretty cheap option to create those like machine generated Webvtt files for our students to start working from. VLC is the media player that we recommended they all download to their computer, because we found it worked a little bit better than trying to use, I forget what Microsoft's like embedded video player is, but it can be cumbersome. And VLC also, you can add a Webvtt file into the video to double check it, which can make it like a good process to like address errors. And then Atom we found was really useful for the QC process. So those are the free, well, not Sonix, but the other two are free open source tools that we recommended folks to download onto their home computers that were working on the project. So basically the project's key workflow was I would download remotely all of the video files from our servers and generate those Webvtt files and upload them up to Dropbox. Then we would maintain a list of all the files in a Google spreadsheet. The student would put their name and kind of claim that file and download the video and the Webvtt file, correct it, and then upload the corrected Webvtt file to a Google Drive folder. Then a second student who is assigned to quality control would download that file and the associated video, do this quality control steps that we had outlined, upload it to Google Drive, and then I would come back in, download it one more time, and upload it to Avalon so that it synced with the video. We also, well, throughout the project, we have tried to be really considerate of what our students are facing. You know, they were undergoing so much as they transitioned to online classes. A lot of them moved home across the country. So we, throughout the project, reminded students that this is tedious work and that they should feel free to take breaks. And we never maintained really strict expectations about like, oh, you should complete, 30 minutes per, shift or anything like that. We never set those expectations just because we did want to be respectful of the stress that they might be experiencing. But we also were really mindful that the content, especially this archival content, could be potentially offensive or upsetting. These were all students who had never worked in special collections, so they weren't necessarily familiar with like archival type content. A lot of them came from, the medical library or had been shelvers or front desk circulation student workers. So they might not be familiar with this. And a lot of our content, because of its historical nature, might have racist or homophobic content or offensive in one way or another. So we were also very clear that if at any point they were uncomfortable on any recording they had started, they could stop it, just let us know and move on to another recording. And we could even make suggestions about, sections of the collection that were less possibly offensive. For example, this still that you see on your screen is from a documentary about the integration of a Houston neighborhood, and the recordings were made in the early 1980s, and the language is, not what you would hear today. And our students, we just wanted to make sure that they were always okay working on the project. We also had extensive training. So going back to the that timeline, we hosted our trainings on Zoom and then shared them as YouTube videos that we just made available. So those are always pinned at the top of our Slack channel, should anyone ever need to go back to them. But it was really a hands-on, walkthrough that we tried to make as transparent as possible, so the students weren't having to kind of guess how we, used our tools, and we used the tools that we had recommended they download. And it was a pretty successful process. In both these videos, you can see that our colleague Nick was the one who did the trainings, and he was, an excellent, he was a former student worker who had moved into a staff position. So he was an excellent teacher for this project. And this is a bit of what a finished product looked like. We were really pleased. This, for example, was this man, I think his speaking was really soft, and he kind of mumbled. And I think that it's an example of how challenging the transcription process could be, but we were really happy with the outcome. And I'm going to play a short video. This is a student, it's about 4 minutes long. This is a student who worked on the project, and her takeaways from it. So.
Hi everyone, I would like to first start off by thanking you guys for inviting me to talk about my experience with working from home. My name is Rachel Garcia, and I'm a current graphic design major at the School of Arts. Before the pandemic began, I was working at the MD Anderson Library alongside Crystal in the DigiLab, and we were working on the thesis and dissertations project. I was coming up on a year of working at the library right around the time that the pandemic began to worsen in our area. I remember being on my lunch break and reading that the Houston Rodeo was canceled, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is getting pretty serious now. And sure enough, classes were canceled, and we were never to come back to school after spring break, and that is kind of when the panic began to settle in. I wasn't sure if I'd have a job. I wasn't sure if I would be able to pay my bills. I wasn't sure if I'd ever come back to school. I wasn't even sure if I'd have toilet paper by the end of the day. Thankfully, about a week after we were sent home, Crystal reached out telling me about the transcription project that was being set up for student workers like myself to have the opportunity to work from home. And I remember feeling very, very grateful and relieved in that moment. Transcribing videos was something I'd never done before, but I use subtitles for movies all the time. I never realized the amount of precise work that has to be done to produce them. And it can definitely be tedious sometimes. This project has definitely opened my eyes to the lack of accessibility that many unfortunately encounter. Subtitles don't seem to be a big feature to many. Some may even find them very annoying, but to many, like the hearing impaired and those not fluent in the language, it is vital for their understanding of the content and being able to actually consume the information. The film collection that I've been working on is called This Is Our Home. It is not for sale. It is a documentary by John Schwartz discussing the involvement of Riverside through the series of interviews from people who have lived and grew up in the area. Through this, I have learned quite a bit about the history of Houston and Riverside, and was also confronted with the sensitive topic of racism with Riverside, as it was once an all-white community and it was transitioning into a multi-ethnic neighborhood. And especially during these times with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and it was very important to realize that these films are from 30 years ago, but these issues are still quite relevant today. My role in this project is quality control. So basically someone corrects the AI generated transcription of the video, and then I go in and make any corrections that they may have missed. Then the most tedious part of my job is making sure that the timestamp is correct so that they align perfectly with the audio and do not appear for too long or too short on the screen. Learning how to transcribe videos definitely had a bit of learning curve, but I would not say it was too difficult. You definitely get a feel for things as you progress, and to this date I've finalized around 52 videos ranging from about 5 to 30 minutes in length. That may not seem like a lot, but a lot of these videos take many hours to process, as the audio in the film is quite dated. So at times I would have to go back into the video and listen to some lines several times until I finally understand what they're trying to say. Other things that can make it tedious is when people are talking over each other multiple times, or talking too fast, or maybe they refer to proper names of places and events which I'm not familiar with. I would have to go in and research those things myself. This is also a new skill for most people working on this project, so the style of transcribing may not exactly match the way that I would transcribe it. So working to consolidate with these differences can also be time consuming, you know. Some of the videos I come across have more errors than others. Some do not address speakers in the same manner that I would. Some cues were different, etc. Which these are all completely understandable things, as we all just kind of dove into this project, so we're also just kind of learning and teaching each other along the way.
They really were learning on the fly, and they did an incredible job because they were juggling so much. And over the year it's been since the project started, we have had a fair number of students graduate or decide not to return based on their schedules. And then we've had actually more students added on to the project because there's still sort of university-wide hiring opportunities. And so depending on the library they were located in, some libraries felt like they should go ahead and hire in positions even if they would not be in person, or if they would be in person maybe for only, say, 6 hours of their 20-hour commitment, and then they would do 14 on this project. So we've continued to rotate students through the project, and it continues today. And I should also mention that this recording, she recorded this several months ago, so I'm sure she's far surpassed her 52 by now. So anyway, to kind of wrap up, the project successes, about maybe 30 to 40% of the videos have had that first level of correction carried out, which is great. Our total video library online is about 1,000 videos, so it's a pretty good number. I think it certainly raised awareness for accessibility issues within the library and among student employees. It also really raised awareness of archival materials among the students. We had some really fantastic feedback. There were a lot of students who seemed to, hopefully they, were being sincere, but they seemed to really enjoy some of the recordings that they worked on. Probably the most important thing is it was able to continue keeping the students employed, because especially in the end, it turned out that they would have been paid anyway, but that information wasn't known until, I would say, probably 3 months into the project, because there was just a real lack of clarity. As you can imagine, our university serves about 60,000 students, so it took a long time for decisions to be made and filtered down to us. And we're also, we serve largely first-generation college students from a really diverse background, so it was really important to us to keep them employed because they rely on this income. So that was a huge success. And then we also developed these really effective workflows to continue creating accessible video content. So even when this project is ended, which I think could likely be at the end of this semester. We, again, don't know anything, but I think it's likely that there will be expectations about returning to campus by the end of this semester at my university. We were able to create this workflow, so hopefully we could continue it, and maybe students working on various projects who, for example, in the DigiLab, when it might be beneficial to take a break from scanning all day, they could transition to a few hours of video correction and then move back to scanning as demands required it, because like in any department, there's ebbs and flows of projects going on. So yeah, that is, I suppose, everything from me. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then, as I said, I'm definitely happy if anybody ever has any interest in seeing documentation or looking at our training videos or anything like that, please reach out and I can provide my email address, other than being kind of cringy recorded Zoom videos. And I have a pixie cut hair, which tells you how long ago it was, or how long it's been since I had a haircut. They're on YouTube and available to anyone who's, interested in the process.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to ask you for all those things and maybe make a little write-up for everyone to follow up and look at those resources. Thank you so much, Emily.
Sure. I moved through, so I'm sorry if it was too fast. I'm a very fast, nervous talker. So.
No, it's great. I feel like I have questions, but I want to make sure give the floor to others if you can. If there's anything you need clarification or you have thoughts about. But I can, I absolutely was wondering, I guess first, I learned something that I feel like I probably should have known, but the using VLC player, the media player that Emily mentioned, using that and you could bring in a Webvtt file. I did not know that. So like you can basically bring it in with the video file and then it plays it like what does it look like? I'm trying to picture. I know I could do it after this, but
let me pull up a picture of it, and because we have it in the documentation, and it really does make a difference. So what we would recommend students do is put their rename the file, the Webvtt file that they were working on, because we have like a sort of a different like underscore slug for every phase of the project, so you could identify which Webvtt you were looking at. And so let me just pull this up and see if it's the right pictures here.
Yeah, Jonathan says didn't know that either, so that's a big cool thing. Thank you.
And so it made it so that you could like read along, and that might help people to sort of identify when things were not right. So this is just explaining like the hotkeys for VLC, because that also is really nice, as opposed to like I forget what the Windows media player is, but that is like, I never find those timestamps like remotely correct, and you can't do any like kind of fine tuning. So yeah, so right here, you just, in VLC, you just add subtitle file and you add it, and it looks just like any other subtitle track. So it would look just like the left-hand side. And so what we would recommend students do is rename keep the original file on their desktop and then make a duplicate and rename it as something, their corrected version. And then they could watch along on the captioned video while they correct, because sometimes seeing the thing while you're listening might be a little bit easier than the never-ending white and black text of your like notepad document. And so that was just one strategy we would recommend to our students working on the project. And it also helps with that timestamp, because Rachel mentions in the recording that nudging of the timestamps can be just incredibly tedious. So it also helped to watch it embedded to see when things were off.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's great. And then what did you actually end up doing with numbers as your like
Our best practices.
Yeah, best practice thing.
Let me remind myself of what we did with our numbers. How about?
Because it's actually, it seems like it would just to me, I'm just like, oh, well, at first I think, oh, well, we'll write it out. But then it's like, how do you write out a year? That's going to be really long and fit. And like, no. And then there could be like very, very long numbers. Yeah.
Million. So we had kind of strategies for almost all of those things because they did come up so much, and our students were great about asking questions. So it really drove us to like refine our expectations. So generally we would, spell out numbers 1 through 9, and above that use the numerals. And then we address to the, let me scroll all the way back up here. Like money numbers, we treated differently. So, so this example of like 10 million, we did not expect them to put, 6 zeros, because the thing is if you are deaf or hard of hearing and you're supposed to be reading out, like the likelihood of catching, I mean, anyone, not specific to that, but if you're relying solely on captions, the idea of being able to like process those numerals, I think is probably super challenging. I don't think I could. So, so we gave sort of examples of this, like you can see here where we would recommend they say like 3,000 written out, not write out like lots of different dollar figures, unless it was, like a specific, $396, and then we would, revert back to the.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Cause I was definitely wondering if there was a, like, something that I wouldn't be thinking of just right off the bat as far as accessibility goes for like writing it out, but that seems to be the other way around. That totally makes sense. And then I remember at one point at one of the conferences I heard you speak at about this, you gave an example of a word that
Bayou, I'm sure.
Yes.
Example. Yeah, so we're in Texas, and also, that we do have like I mentioned, our student, we're like we're very proud. UH is very proud of telling everyone that we're the second most diverse campus in the country. So people are coming from all different language backgrounds, all different speaking backgrounds. But then Houston, especially old Houston, has some very unique accents that are like very specific. So there's like 2 factions of Houstonians, and one half say the word bayou, which comes up more than you would ever expect in Houston recordings, and the other half say bio, and it's like, what is a bio? And I had to listen to, and I'm from not Houston, but like I've lived in Texas and New Orleans for most of my adult life, so like I'm not like not used to Southern and Texas accents. But bio, like it's like a very specific subsection of like old Houston that says it. And I have this dream of creating like a super cut of all the like bayou bios that come up because it's so bizarre. So there's lots of like really sort of unique examples like that an AI generated transcript is never going to be able to capture. Really challenging for that technology. And then just really, unique proper names and street names and that sort of thing. And there's names, this is true, I always think of New Orleans too, but it's true for Houston and New Orleans, where the way we say the name of street is just like not how you would say that word in any other context. It only is for the street. You call it this like weird, incorrect pronunciation. So those are all like our big challenges. So we would have the student kind of like flag, with a brackets and 2 question marks, so we could search for like that to like highlight the errors, because sometimes it just takes someone who's maybe more familiar with local idiosyncrasies that your average 19-year-old has probably never encountered, especially if they're not from Houston originally.
Would you make a sort of guide or make that part of your guide of like when you come across the term and you're just like, hey, this bayou can be pronounced this many ways?
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I'd actually just like love it as like an oddity too. I think it'd just be like very fun to create, because there are so many, I think every city has them, but they really are a challenge though, from like the accessibility and transcription perspective, because a lot of them, you're never going to like Google your way there. Like you're not going to be able to like phonetically spell it out because it does not make sense phonetically. It's not how anyone expects that word to be spelled. So that's a great idea. I wish we had kind of like, maybe I could like scan back through the Slack and like find some of these more
frequently asked, question kind of things, or mispronunciate, well, not mispronounce it, or errors on the AI part. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's like one of the challenges with like using some of these really large AI generated transcription processes is that they don't really account for that regional dialect. That if you like had the money and the time and the abilities to like get your own like Microsoft and Google and all the big players have their own like APIs that you can like install yourself to create captioning and transcriptions with, and you can train them. And if you had the ability to do that, like really intensive training, like maybe your software would be able to meet these challenges. But a big Sonics like what we used is never going to really have that that local training element to really be able to do it.
Yeah. And Jonathan is sharing that they have a town where older residents pronounce it one way than others. And it's like strange, but like that's, worth documenting in and of itself too. And then, just knowing that happens. And
I grew up in rural West Texas, and I moved there when I was a kid from Oklahoma, and there's a town called, I would call it Colorado City, but people either called it Colorado City or Sea City, and it was like years before I realized Sea City and Colorado City were one place, because I just thought it was like SEA, like I did not know better. I was a kid, and so there's like exactly like this where it's like there's these like really sort of distinct divides depending on like how local you are, I guess.
Absolutely. Like, it's every place completely has this. That's why everyone is dealing with it, but in their own unique way. So it's not like we can like make the computers learn for each other, because it's all very idiosyncratic to our region.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway of my little, going back to the research project that kind of kicked all this off, and my really naive assumption that we would just run everything through these machines because it was going to be so affordable, is that we will never be there. Like, I mean, not in my lifetime, maybe that I shouldn't say that, but like the sort of the proper noun and the like local knowledge element is just like kind of irreplaceable. Like trying to reproduce that is impossible to.
Yeah. Although I also would like to challenge our profession to, and obviously like it depends on what type of organization and policies within that organization, to whether you can do this or not. But I do feel like we should challenge a little bit that we don't have to be perfect. At something is at least better than nothing, right? So like, I know if you run it through if you run a video through or an oral history through one of those computer, AI computer generate that transcript, at least it might pick out some subject terms, right? Like if they talk about snow, it's snow. So then if someone's looking for that, I mean, sure, they might be looking specifically for snow in a rosy, California, but maybe at least it helps you hone a little bit better, so that's sort of like maybe that phase. Some places could do it in a phase where they're like, well, right now we'll just do like an approximate like AI only, and then we'll get to that further description later.
I couldn't agree more. We're doing actually a separate project. I'm using this I'm really getting the most out of this like little grant money I had, but we only have 2 students available to work on it, but we have this really wonderful collection of oral histories that are all from survivors of Hurricane Katrina and Rita. And they were all survivors that evacuated to Houston, and they're wonderful. And they were like peer-to-peer, so survivor to survivor interviews, and a huge portion of them were not transcribed. A lot were, but a huge portion were. And so we're doing exactly that. We're making very imperfect transcripts, and at the top we're labeling them as machine generated. And then we have our 2 students who are able to work on this project are just going through and finding those subject terms, and that's all they're doing. So we have like a spreadsheet of like these like kind of fields that we're hoping to find, like if it identifies what neighborhood they came from, how they identify themselves, like that kind of information. And then just very high level of what they talk about. Like, did they talk about evacuating? Okay. Because it would be another, I mean, there are hundreds again of transcripts and they're fairly long interviews. It would be another couple years before the project was finished otherwise.
Yeah, it's like MPLP for transcripts, like more product, less process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, another outcome of this project that we're planning to do is we're going to strip all the timestamp information out of these transcripts and make them into just text files and put them into our institutional repository. So if anyone wanted to do like deep dive text analysis, like across a collection, they'll have just like this big old data set of Houston-based creations, and they can, you know.
Are you going to run like a script to get rid of all the time code? Okay.
No, it's not physical. I would, luckily, Andrew Weidner, who's one of the partners, the like project partners on this, he's nifty with writing little scripts for things. So it's a huge help.
Yeah. That's super cool. That's another really interesting way to use that information.
And maybe no one will use it, but they're just a bunch of text files, so they're not going to take up too much storage. So it's like that, you know, well, it'll be there whenever anyone's ready for it. And if no one ever comes, there are worse things in this world. So
right. But you gave the option, right?
Yeah, it can't hurt.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Jonathan says it's definitely worth noting in the transcripts the dialect differences.
Yeah, I think that there's like really a cool, I mean, I'm sure that the right linguist, like these would be such cool collections, these like hyper regional and like time specific collections, because really these like this is our home that Rachel mentioned in her little clip. I mean, they are just like, they're like this very old, very wealthy Houston type of speaking that is like, to me, pretty foreign. Like it's not something I hear living here now at all. So I think it's like fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, and thinking of other languages as well, how are you on that end, since you said that you have a lot of students that might at least have proficiency in another language?
So we did sort of leverage that opportunity. We have, these aren't online because we don't have total rights clearance. There's a little bit of a gap in documentation for them, but we have this pretty large, not too large, this like great oral history from the 1970s of the fight in Texas to get bilingual education legalized. Basically, it was like a real huge fight through like the Texas government system. Anyway, almost all of the people are bilingual educators, and so almost all of the recordings feature English and Spanish. So we did sort of leverage, because we have so many multilingual students, we did do a call out early on and get any student who's interested in doing some like bilingual transcription and translation work. And so all of those were done, they're just audio, and they're just like kind of more like an oral history transcript rather than a closed caption project. But we did them the English machine generated transcript, and then they corrected all the Spanish, and then they also did like bracketed translations for the Spanish, so that they're a little bit more searchable, because we did have this like really, you know, great opportunity for them to work on this. It'd be great, I mean, again, like with more resources, to also have them completely transcribed in Spanish so that they were like fully accessible to both languages, but that's sort of a matter of resources, you know, and like if they were able to get through, you know, we weren't really able to tackle that much because of the natural graduation rate and students moving on to different things and that sort of thing. But we did do a little bit of that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And actually, you bring up a really good point. The difference between oral history transcripts and closed captioning.
Mhm.
And there is a difference, and it's, yeah, so they're not exactly created equal. I don't know if you can speak to, like, give an example of that, or
Well, in true oral history, my understanding, and I'm not an oral historian by any means, but in
either.
oral history, you're supposed to ideally, and I think maybe the standards have changed over time, but you're supposed to create the transcript and then let the interviewee review it before it's finalized. So if they want to correct and say, like, I don't appreciate you using a weird vernacular, like this is, or that sort of thing, that's an option. And there's expectations about like writing in the keywords and things like that in a transcript, which would never happen in a caption. We relied heavily on Baylor University has like a really robust, which is in Texas here, really robust oral history program. So we relied heavily on their documentation because it already existed, and we, were doing our best, but we don't really have like an oral history program per se. So we were really grateful to have those resources online.
Yeah, no, it's already done. And
Yeah. And I mean, the expectation, at least from like the government, like FCC regulations for like television closed captions, is that they're as authentic as possible. But there's really not that for a oral history transcript. It's a little bit of a different animal. Like it can be a little less, accuracy is like measured in a different way.
Mhm.
And there's sort of like a collaboration between the interviewee and the transcription that doesn't happen anywhere else.
And I mean, this is more of like a kind of baked into the actual like content of like an oral history versus TV news.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, like having like closed captions, you do have to say things like, sad music plays in background sort of thing, or yeah, sobbing, like explaining things that that add to the video, that like, yeah. Whereas like, I don't think that really happens in like, truck is heard passing by in background. Like you're not going to do that in an oral history.
Absolutely. That's actually been one of my like favorite parts of this project, is like the students' take on like jaunty music versus like upbeat, because we had all of them do 2 really, really short pilots just to make sure they kind of got it. And so you were able to see like over and over and over again how they described like this like music differently. It's very charming. Like, and it's like kind of some little like insight into who they are, whether they think it's like jaunty or upbeat or just music,
Right.
there is like kind of some personality in captions that you can see come through what is decided to be put in and what isn't, and how it's described. And
Yeah. It's not like completely, the computers they can't quite like,
yeah, they
take
can't decide
over.
if
Just,
it's like upbeat fight song or like jaunty jingle or whatever it is. So it's just fascinating. I like it a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. I want to make sure, that we, anyone else have any, I don't know, Paul or Laura, if you guys have any, or just like comments on what we do with our oral histories in particular, because I know that that's what we do transcripts on. Hey, Paul.
Hey, so we're actually just talking about it in Slack right now.
Okay. I know.
Yeah, so I mean, up to this point, we have a lot of oral histories, and a lot of transcript information too, but a lot of those transcripts are from like legacy Word docs that have been, converted into PDFs and all that. We have the capability of ingesting things like Webvtt, and it was always on our roadmap to get there. But it's more difficult for a public institution like a public library than a university, though, I think, precisely because you don't have the access to student labor, frankly,
Mhm.
to work on this stuff. So I mean, we always wanted to have the capability of presenting captions with our oral histories, actually, like real dynamic captions that show up in the video, time coded and all of that. But it's always kind of been a we'll get there eventually kind of thing. But listening into this presentation, that was being pretty inspiring, actually, because we we know how to do it, we can do it, we just haven't done it. And we're always looking for, especially now, like really kind of not only like sort of simple telework projects for our staff, but also ones that are actually interesting and help them, really engage with our content. So, maybe we'll kind of move this up the priority lists of actually getting a real, like actual transcription functioning with our digital collections.
Yeah, and that's the reality, like of many, I'm sure, of our MemLab network partners as well. Emily, you were going to say something.
Oh no, I just totally agree. Like I do think it's like a good project for volunteers or students or staff that maybe it isn't normally their work, because it has like a real tangible value. Like I think that that's like sort of satisfying. And I think, in the like frantic effort to get work up and running for people got assigned some like pretty wild things, but this, like, you could really understand why it was valuable. And I think that that is like pretty satisfying. And I also wanted to mention, not to be like doomsayer, but there have been a lot of lawsuits coming out for lack of accessibility, and most of them have been pointed towards universities now. But I don't know that that's, I mean, they're public, a lot of them are public universities. Like, I don't know that it's not going to also, I would love everyone to do this because it's like morally important, but also I think that, it is legally a requirement, that's not
Right.
true either. So, there's like, and of course, money is short, and especially, public libraries are underfunded. So it's like easy to say this, but I do think it's got some potential. I was going to real quick show.
Oh, we have plenty of time. Yeah.
Okay. This is again, like, I'm not like advertising for Sonics. I literally chose it because it was like the cheapest. But I was going to say that so this is what it looks like, and you could actually correct it in the platform if you wanted to. But
Yeah.
I was going to mention that you can export. So if you were just doing transcripts, you can export to all these different formats. So like we did to Webvtt for our work, but you could also do like a Microsoft Word document or a text file if that's more useful to you. And then you could come back in 6 months and download it as something else.
Yes.
But
The other thing I like about these kinds of, like this, I haven't used Sonics, but Trint, Trint, is another one that you pay for that you can, it looks like this. And you can like slow the video down. So if you can't understand a word, maybe if you hear it slower, you can then figure it out. And then you can like listen more quickly as well. So it might help to go through it a little more quickly if there's not that many errors.
absolutely. And then it also has a thing. I feel like I'm such an ad, but they're like only.
It's a good tool. Yeah.
But they also have this option, which I've used some. If you have a Word document of a transcript and it doesn't have timestamps and stuff, you can put the video and your created transcript back into it, and then it will sync them for you.
That's great.
You can go the other direction. So
Yeah.
that can be pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I feel like either there's got to be a way to, somehow automate taking the Word docs that already have at least the good information and then adding timestamps. Yeah.
So it goes the other way, which can be great, especially like what you were describing. We have these like weird legacy PDFs, so we just like copy and paste them out, and then you can just reverse engineer it. And that's another thing, like Siobhan was saying, where like it's okay not to be perfect. I have not been checking those. I'm okay if the timestamps are like a little off, like, because it's so much better just to have them connected to the like object, that like if they aren't perfectly synced, like life will go on. Like it's
Right. It's not going to totally take away from the meaning of the resource. Yeah.
so much meaning to have them at least like roughly, and they're within, seconds. It's not like they're like minutes off. So it's anyway.
Exactly. No, that's super, super interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, that's like a nice, and I bet I think all of these are basically the exact same thing with different names, is my hot take on all these services. So I bet they all have this like reverse option, which is handy. And
yeah, absolutely. And like, And that's another thing that I was going to say. I don't know if you can actually say which like tools that you tried were better. But you know, as far as the automated goes,
I'll
but
share.
I think you're you know.
Well, I just didn't want to publish it because I'm like a little nervous about that, but I'm happy to like spread it around. But
Well, I am recording it.
Yeah.
I can take it out if you want me to take it
share
out.
it in an email.
Right. Okay. That sounds fine. Yeah.
I don't know.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, you know, the students that worked on these transcripts. Did they find it at all difficult to, you know, juggle, you know, starting and stopping audio, then typing, then restarting and stopping audio and typing? And like, if they did you have any strategies that you kind of had to help them with that?
That's why we provided that little list of that's why we recommended VLC. Number one, it's a little bit I think easier to run with. And then let me just, and then we kind of provided these like info on like the so, you know, using the space bar as a stop and start. And then like these like hotkeys where you can do like short jumps or long jumps. And you could also sort of what Siobhan was mentioning in Trent, where you can play faster and slower. So it had all those options. So we just made them aware of those. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have provided foot pedals to everyone and like all those like great
Yeah,
tools.
I was going to bring up foot pedals. In a former life, I used to be a transcript editor for a news agency, and yeah, with doing it without a pedal, like that thought is just like horrifying to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we had like literally any budget, but this was, you know, this was a $3,000 budget. So, you know, we were doing our best, but I think in a perfect world, we absolutely would be providing them all with foot pedals, because I think that probably is a huge game changer. And also like just for like sort of repetitive stress injuries. And that's why we were always very, I think, did our best to be very generous about like encouraging breaks and not having like, oh, you didn't finish your 20 hours this week, you know, kind of thing. We were just like, it'll be fine because it isn't a really imperfect. And we don't even know what our students come from, all different backgrounds and stuff. We don't even know what kind of like computers they're working on. If they're working on like these like, you know, slow, not great internet clunkers, you know, that's going to affect your work. You know, they didn't have great workstations or anything. I think a lot of them were at home sharing with siblings and who knows what. So we were just like, it'll be fine.
That is such a good point. Yeah, yeah. So the foot pedal is just what it sounds like. It's just like as you go, you just stop and start the video.
You can even fast forward. So the foot pedal is smart enough that it has like a left and right side. So you can play and stop, but you can also fast forward and back up with
And
it.
your hands are busy typing away and fixing and yeah.
And it's smart enough too to know that
Exactly.
it talks to the video and doesn't interrupt your Word document. So you're not shifting back and forth between screens.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's how like transcription services do it. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that
And most transcription services too have like really smart, or like closed captioning services have really smart, you pre-program in a bunch of buttons, or like, so if you know this phrase, like if you're doing like I don't know, a presidential address and you know like some phrases are just going to get brought up over and over again, you program those in so you can just like click that phrase that whatever president keeps using in, and you don't have to think about it. So there's some really or probably the same is true like if you were doing football, you know, touchdown, you're not going to write touchdown every time, you're just going to do a hotkey for touchdown every single time.
gotcha.
That's industry money. That is not
Right.
public library or university money.
Right, exactly. And yeah, yeah. It seems like there's a really, I'm just happy that there are a lot of options. You know, and it's just like, and this is the memory lab that we say over and over of like the spectrum of like, you know, worst practices, best practices, and like where are your resources and what you can fall in. And so I feel like today your presentation helped so much to like help us learn a lot more of these either low cost or no cost options. And sure, we might not have student workers, that's for sure, but just getting an idea of like how much it is actually a really involved process, and that, yeah.
And this would have never, I mean, not to be grim, but this would have never happened without the pandemic. Like there was not like a strong movement towards a project like this. We would have never had this kind of like workforce working on a project like this. I mean, it's incredible for our collections, but it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have happened otherwise. And so I like, not to like, you know, go back to this over and over again, but I really do think, so I grew up in West Texas, and it's like, I am not religious, but it's very religious there. And there's this phrase, don't be so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And I always think about that for this, like, you can't be like so focused on perfection that you're just not putting anything out, because nothing will ever get put out. So, you know, I could imagine that we'll get to the end of this project and we'll run out of time and students to do the like high level QC, and we'll just put up the first level of corrected transcripts, because at least they're up, you know, and they're probably pretty good. And
No, I was like amazed when I saw that. I was like, and then they QC it. Wow. Oh, you know, like, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. And I mean, yeah, Jonathan is adding something that I think is important, that they have volunteers to assist, but their technical skills and grasp of what's required varies. So don't think that, you know, that they'd be able to do transcripts like this. And that's a very real point. Like, I feel like, yeah, what kind of equipment they might have, technical background and skills. But yeah, this is also where obviously, like, I like for us to be, we have to be talking about these things so that we can come up with some options that are going to work for us. But I also want us to not just then run away completely from transcripts for video, or then just be like, well, just run away from video in general, because like, it's like, oh, well, if legally then we're gonna have to have transcripts, we won't even deal with AV. Let's just not even deal with it. We'll deal with it later. We all know that we don't have, I mean, we have some time to deal with it, but like, it is more at risk. So I just like, and in order to make then videos more accessible and like to prove the worth and the value of them, they need to be transcribed so that people can more easily find what they're looking for within that video. So yeah, that's my little soapbox.
yeah, I think there's a lot of value. Like if your platform doesn't support, you know, embedded closed captions, just dumping that transcript in the description and calling it a day, and don't do any describing. Like it's just, you know, just call that, you know, like I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Or doing indexes. So like where you have that might be a good middle ground where you just say, so-and-so talks about this place, you know, and then you can just jump to that spot, you know, and so it's just an index of topics that they talk about and jump to that, rather than word for word, and then you get into that later sort of thing.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to Jonathan's comment about technical grasp, because that might be like a really great project. I mean, frankly, someone could sit there with a notebook and a pencil and watch the whole thing, and then just kind of do like the themes, like, and then rough timestamps and say like,
Right.
well, about halfway through, they're talking about dogs.
Exactly. At 15 minutes, it's this. Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, there's a lot of different levels of access and discoverability that you can add with this type of thing. And but yeah, it's so resource intensive, and that's just audiovisual materials. But from your sharing your experience, Emily, and your research and everything, all the outcomes, then you're helping all of us to learn from that. So thank you so much.
I'm happy to. And for sure, like I said, like this was like such a group effort. It like never would have gotten off the ground if I hadn't had like an entire digitization department step up to the plate because it was pretty overwhelming. And then they just like came through, and they already had workflows which were phenomenal, that we just like kind of reworked for this project. So
yeah, exactly. Teamwork.
Yeah, I mean, truly,
Yeah.
truly, who knows what would have happened? There would be like 6 videos by now if it had not been for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so tough to stay on top of knowing like which tool is this new tool is this and that. So yeah, like, and even just knowing the ins and outs of VLC. What'd you
Yeah.
say?
You just make the best decision you can. Because like I presented this at the Library of Congress, this like kind of I guess it was a little bit like a conference. And people were like, oh, like, why didn't you use open source? And I was like, because we didn't have time to think about it. Like, I knew this thing existed and I knew it was like cheap. And that was like literally all, like, I just didn't have, it wasn't like a planned out project and we just made our choices and then full steam ahead. And that's okay. Like
Exactly.
it has to be kind of.
Doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah. So cool. Anybody, any other last lingering questions or thoughts? Cool.
I'll send an email to you, Siobhan, of like a big link roundup of everything and
Yes.
share it out to anybody. Everything is imperfect, but it's totally fine. And people are welcome to reuse it or change it or, ignore it.
Absolutely. I'm definitely going to be probably pulling a lot from that documentation. So cool.
Yeah, we
Thank
100% are. Thanks so much.
Yeah, cool.
In the documentation to the like Baylor stuff that I used, I like refer back to it. So there's even like better stuff that comes out of it. So
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Emily, for your time and expertise. And happy Wednesday, everyone.
Almost February even. So.
Yes, this is crazy. It's crazy. All right, take care, and I'll see you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.